I saw my dead husband buying heirloom tomatoes at the farmer's market 6 months after I buried him. The August sun beat down on the cracked asphalt parking lot, and for a moment I thought the heat was playing tricks on my eyes. That grief had finally broken something vital in my brain. But no, there he was, reaching for a basket of Cherokee purples, his left hand extended, the same hand that had worn a wedding band for 17 years, the same hand I'd held as he took his last rattling breath in that sterile hospital room. Before this story truly begins, please leave us a comment telling us which state or city you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can grow and bring you more compelling stories. My name is Simone. Before that Saturday morning, I would have told you I knew exactly what my life was. I was a 42-year-old widow, a high school English teacher trying to figure out how to exist in a world that no longer contained my husband. I lived in a 3-bedroom craftsman bungalow in the historic district of a mid-sized southern city, the kind of place where everyone knows your business and brings casseroles when tragedy strikes. My husband's name had been DeShawn, and he had died of a sudden heart attack at 45, leaving me with a mortgage, a car payment, and a grief so profound it felt like drowning in open air. I had been standing at the honey vendor's stand, my reusable shopping bag already heavy with peaches and fresh bread, when I saw him. The woman selling wildflower honey was talking about pollination patterns, her voice a pleasant buzz in the background of my thoughts. I was nodding, pretending to listen, doing what I'd been doing for 6 months, going through the motions of normalcy while feeling nothing but a vast emptiness. And then my eyes drifted across the crowded market, past the tent selling kettle corn, beyond the family with the screaming toddler, and landed on a man examining tomatoes with the exact intensity that DeShawn had always brought to produce selection. The world tilted. My fingers went numb. The jar of honey I'd been holding slipped through my grasp and shattered on the pavement, golden liquid spreading across the hot asphalt like a slow-motion explosion. The vendor made a sound of concern, but her voice seemed to come from underwater, distorted and distant. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, because that man right there in the faded blue t-shirt and khaki shorts was my husband. Every detail was wrong and right simultaneously. The height was correct, maybe 6 feet tall, the same athletic build that DeShawn had maintained by playing basketball every Sunday morning. The way he stood, weight slightly shifted to his left leg, exactly how DeShawn had stood after he'd torn his ACL in college. The man turned slightly, reaching for his wallet, and I saw his profile. My knees buckled. It was DeShawn's nose, the slight bump where he'd broken it in high school. DeShawn's jawline, DeShawn's close-cropped fade, though maybe with a bit more gray at the temples. But it couldn't be. I'd buried my husband. I'd stood at his grave and watched them lower his casket into red Georgia clay. I'd picked out the suit he wore for eternity, navy blue with a burgundy tie, because he'd always said those colors made him look distinguished. I'd signed the death certificate, I'd filed the life insurance claim, I'd endured the pitying looks and the awkward conversations and the well-meaning friends who told me time would heal the wound, as if grief operated on some predetermined schedule. The honey vendor was still talking, asking if I was okay, if she should call someone. I shook my head mutely, unable to form words. My eyes never left the man at the tomato stand. He was paying now, pulling bills from a worn leather wallet. Not the wallet I'd given to Sean for our 10th anniversary, but close enough to make my chest constrict. He took his change, dropped a few bills in the vendor's tip jar, exactly the kind of generous gesture DeShawn would have made, and turned to walk away. I followed. Of course I followed. What else could I do? My shopping bag lay forgotten on the ground near the spreading pool of honey. My rational mind screamed that this was impossible, that I was having a breakdown, that grief counseling and medication were clearly not enough. But my feet moved of their own accord, carrying me through the crowd of Saturday morning shoppers, my eyes locked on the blue t-shirt ahead of me. He walked with purpose, not rushing, but not dawdling either, weaving through the farmer's market with the ease of someone who knew exactly where he was going. I stayed about 20 feet behind, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. He stopped at the coffee truck, ordered something, waited while the barista prepared his drink. I ducked behind a tent selling handmade soaps, watching through racks of lavender sachets. When he turned around with his cup, I saw his face full on for the first time. My breath caught. It was him. It was DeShawn. Or it was DeShawn's twin, his doppelganger, his ghost made flesh. He headed toward the parking lot, sipping his coffee, completely unaware that his supposedly widowed wife was trailing him like a private investigator. The rational part of my brain kept insisting this was a mistake, a resemblance, my traumatized psyche projecting what it wanted to see onto an innocent stranger. But the rational part of my brain had grown very quiet over the past 6 months, drowned out by the howling void of loss. In the parking lot, he walked to a silver sedan parked in the far corner, under the shade of an oak tree. Not the black SUV I'd sold 3 months ago, unable to afford the payments on a teacher's salary. He unlocked the car with a key fob, the lights flashing once. He set his bag of produce in the passenger seat, slid behind the wheel, and started the engine. I stood, frozen between two cars, watching him, my mind racing with impossible scenarios. Witness protection, amnesia, some elaborate hoax. Each explanation seemed more absurd than the last. But then he pulled out of the parking space and something primal took over. I ran to my own car, a 10-year-old sedan I'd bought used after selling DeShawn's SUV, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. I got the door open, threw myself inside, started the engine. He was already turning onto the main road by the time I got out of the parking lot. I accelerated, heart racing, palms sweating against the steering wheel. This was insane. I was insane. But I kept driving, keeping his silver sedan in sight, maintaining a careful distance like I'd seen in 1,000 movies. We drove through town, past the library where I'd taken DeShawn for book club meetings when he'd been laid up with his torn ACL and bored out of his mind, past the soul food restaurant where we'd had our first date, past the hospital where he'd died. With each familiar landmark, the unreality of the situation intensified. We left the main commercial district and entered a residential neighborhood I didn't recognize. Tree-lined streets with modest ranch houses, chain-link fences, kids' bikes abandoned in front yards. The silver sedan turned left, then right, navigating with the confidence of someone who knew these streets intimately. I followed, my breath coming in short gasps now, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't begin to answer. Finally, he turned into a driveway, a small white ranch house with black shutters, a neatly maintained lawn, a basketball hoop mounted over the garage door. The sight of that basketball hoop sent a spike of pain through my chest, so sharp I gasped aloud. DeShawn had been a fanatic about basketball, had played every Sunday without fail, had talked constantly about getting a hoop for our house, but had never gotten around to it. I drove past the house, not stopping, my heart in my throat. Found a spot 2 blocks away where I could see the house but hopefully not be immediately visible. Parked, turned off the engine, sat in the sudden silence, my hands still gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. What was I doing? What could I possibly hope to accomplish? If this man wasn't DeShawn, I was stalking some innocent stranger who happened to look like my dead husband. If it was DeShawn, then my entire reality for the past 6 months had been a lie, and I couldn't begin to process the implications of that. But I couldn't leave, couldn't walk away. I sat in my car as the August sun climbed higher, heat building inside the vehicle despite the shade, watching that white ranch house with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The man who might or might not be my dead husband disappeared inside, the front door closing behind him. 15 minutes passed, 20, 30. Nothing happened. No movement visible through the windows. No one came or went. I thought about the life insurance money, still sitting mostly untouched in my savings account. $75,000, the payout from DeShawn's policy through his job at the telecommunications company. I'd used some of it to cover the funeral expenses, to catch up on bills, but most of it remained, a windfall I'd been too paralyzed by grief to know how to use. If DeShawn was alive, that money was obtained through fraud. I could go to prison for insurance fraud, Or could I? I hadn't known. How could I have known? But I was getting ahead of myself. First, I needed to know the truth. I waited 2 hours in that car, and nothing happened. The man didn't emerge. No one else arrived. The neighborhood drowsed in the summer heat, occasional cars passing, a woman walking a dog, kids riding bikes in lazy circles. Normal life happening all around me while my world crumbled into incomprehensible chaos. Finally, I started the car and drove home, my hands trembling on the wheel, my mind reeling. The craftsman bungalow I'd shared with DeShawn looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. The front porch with its hanging ferns, the blue painted door, the flower beds I'd been neglecting since his death. I sat in my driveway, staring at the house, and for the first time in 6 months, I felt something other than grief. I felt anger, cold, crystallizing rage. If DeShawn was alive, he had let me believe he was dead. He had let me weep over his casket, let me plan a funeral, let me stand in front of 200 people and deliver a eulogy for a man who was apparently buying tomatoes at farmers' markets. He had let me suffer the most profound loss of my life while he was living in a white ranch house with a basketball hoop. I walked into my house, closed the door behind me, leaned against it, and let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. Then I pulled out my phone and did what I should have done immediately. I called my best friend, Tanisha. She picked up on the second ring, her voice bright with her usual energy. "Girl, where'd you disappear to? I was waiting for you at the market. We were supposed to have lunch." I'd completely forgotten about our plans. "Tanisha," I said, my voice shaking, "I need you to come over right now. I saw something. Someone. I think I'm losing my mind." The brightness left her voice immediately, replaced by concern. "I'm on my way, 10 minutes." She made it in 8. Tanisha had been my best friend since college, a force of nature in human form, 5 feet 2 inches of unshakable loyalty and fierce protectiveness. She worked as a paralegal at a law firm downtown, knew everyone in our city, and had been the one to hold me together at DeShawn's funeral when I'd nearly collapsed at the graveside. I met her at the door, and the words came spilling out before she'd even fully stepped inside. "I saw DeShawn at the farmer's market. I followed him. He's alive, Tanisha. He's alive and living in a house. Across town." Tanisha's expression cycled through confusion, concern, and finally settled on the gentle look people reserve for those they fear might be having a breakdown. "Simone, honey, sit down. Let me get you some water." "I'm not crazy," I said, my voice rising. "I know how it sounds, but I saw him. I followed him home. It was DeShawn." She guided me to the couch, her hands gentle but firm on my shoulders. Okay, okay, tell me everything, from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the tomatoes, the honey jar shattering, the profile that was unmistakably my husband's, the way he walked, the way he stood, the basketball hoop mounted over the garage, every detail that had convinced me I was looking at a dead man walking. Tanisha listened without interrupting, her face carefully neutral. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Simone, grief does things to our perception. The mind can play tricks when we're hurting. Maybe this man just looks like DeShawn. People have doppelgangers. It happens." "That's what I thought at first," I said. "That's what I kept telling myself. But it wasn't just the way he looked. It was everything. The way he moved, his gestures, the way he examined those tomatoes like they were precious gems because DeShawn always took produce selection so seriously. Even if it looked exactly like him, that doesn't mean it was him," Tanisha said carefully. "We buried DeShawn, Simone. You and I stood at that grave together. I held your hand while they lowered the casket." "I know," I whispered. "I know all of that. But what if the casket was empty? What if there was no body? Did I ever actually see the body?" That question hung in the air between us, heavy and terrible. The truth was, I hadn't. At the funeral home, they'd recommended a closed casket. DeShawn's heart attack had been massive, they'd explained, and the autopsy had been extensive. They'd assured me he looked peaceful, that the morticians had done excellent work, but wouldn't it be better to remember him as he was in life? I'd agreed, too shattered to argue, too overwhelmed to insist on seeing him one last time. I saw Tanisha's expression change as she realized the same thing I was realizing. You didn't view the body, she said slowly. They said it would be better if I didn't. They said I should remember him alive. Oh my God. Tanisha stood up, started pacing my living room. She was in lawyer mode now. I could see it. Her mind working through possibilities and implications. Okay, let's think about this logically. If DeShawn is alive, there would have had to be a conspiracy. The hospital, the morgue, the funeral home, they'd all have to be in on it. That's a lot of people to keep quiet. Unless they were fooled too, I said. Unless someone switched the body, or unless there was never a body at all, and somehow someone paid off the right people to falsify the records. But why? Tanisha demanded. Why would DeShawn fake his own death? Why would anyone go to that much trouble? That was the question that had no answer, the hole at the center of this impossible situation. I don't know, I admitted. I can't think of a single reason. We had a good marriage. We were happy, weren't we? The doubt crept in then, insidious and poisonous. Had we been happy? I'd thought so, but people in happy marriages didn't fake their deaths. Had I missed signs? Had there been problems I'd been too blind or too comfortable to see? We need to go to that house, Tanisha said decisively. Right now, we need to see this man up close, in good light, and determine definitively whether it's DeShawn or not. I can't just knock on his door, I protested. If it's not him, I'll look insane. And if it is him, I don't know what I'll do. I don't know if I can handle that. Then we'll watch from the car, Tanisha said. We'll stake out the house, wait for him to come out, get a good look. If it's not DeShawn, you'll see that. Clearly in daylight and we can move on. If it is, well, then we'll deal with that when we know for sure. She was right. I couldn't spend the rest of my life wondering. Couldn't let this uncertainty eat away at me. I needed to know definitively one way or the other, even if the truth destroyed me. We took Tanisha's car, a sensible gray crossover that wouldn't stand out in the neighborhood. She drove, following my directions, to the white ranch house with the basketball hoop. It was early afternoon now, the heat of the day at its peak, the streets quiet. We parked in the same spot I'd used earlier, 2 blocks away, but with a clear line of sight to the house. Now we wait, Tanisha said, settling in with the patience born of years conducting surveillance for her law firm. We waited. The afternoon stretched on, sticky and uncomfortable despite the air conditioning. We talked in circles, going over the possibilities again and again. Maybe it was a twin DeShawn had never mentioned. Maybe it was witness protection, though that raised the question of what crime DeShawn could have witnessed and why no one would have told me. Maybe I'd actually died in an accident and this was purgatory, my mind creating increasingly bizarre scenarios to torture me. At 4:30, the front door opened. The man stepped out, wearing basketball shorts and a sleeveless athletic shirt, carrying a basketball. My breath stopped. He walked to the driveway, dribbled the ball a few times, testing its bounce. Then he started shooting baskets. His form absolutely perfect, the muscle memory of thousands of hours of practice evident in every movement. Oh my God, Tanisha whispered. She'd seen it too, the unmistakable signature of DeShawn's playing style, the little fake to the left before every shot, the way he followed through with his wrist just so. We watched for 15 minutes while he shot baskets in his driveway, completely unaware that his dead wife and her best friend were watching. From 2 blocks away, every movement was DeShawn, every gesture, the way he wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist, the way he bounced the ball between his legs before taking a free throw. It was a catalog of intimacy, 17 years of shared life condensed into a basketball practice. And then a car pulled into the driveway. A blue minivan, several years old but well maintained. A woman got out. She was younger than me, maybe mid-30s, with long braided hair and a bright summer dress. 2 children tumbled out of the back seat, a boy about 8 and a girl maybe 5 or 6. They ran to the man who looked like DeShawn, who was DeShawn, and he scooped them up, one in each arm, spinning them around, while they shrieked with laughter. The woman approached, and he set down the children to kiss her. Not a peck, but a real kiss, intimate and familiar. She said something I couldn't hear from this distance, and he laughed, that distinctive laugh that had always made his shoulders shake slightly. Then he picked up the basketball, tossed it to the boy, and they all went inside together. A family. A complete family. Going inside to their home, their life, their world that had nothing to do with me. I couldn't breathe. The interior of Tanisha's car felt like it was shrinking, pressing in on me from all sides. My chest constricted. My vision started to tunnel. I was dimly aware of Tanisha's hands on my shoulders, her voice urgent in my ear, telling me to breathe, just breathe, but I couldn't. The man I'd buried 6 months ago had a whole other family, children, a wife who wasn't me, a life that ran parallel to the one we'd shared, and somehow I'd never known. Drive, I managed to gasp out. Please get me out of here. Tanisha drove. I don't remember the route back to my house, don't remember anything but the roaring in my ears, and the image burned into my brain of DeShawn kissing another woman, DeShawn lifting children who weren't mine, children I'd thought we might have someday, conversations we'd had about family planning, about waiting until we were more financially secure, about making sure the timing was right. All those years of waiting, and he'd already had the family, just not with me. Back at my house, I made it to the bathroom before I threw up. Tanisha held my hair back, ran cool water on a washcloth, pressed it to the back of my neck. When I was empty and shaken, she helped me to my bedroom, made me lie down, drew the curtains against the late afternoon sun. I'm calling off work Monday, she said. I'm staying with you. We're going to figure this out. How? I whispered. How do you figure out that your entire life was a lie? She had no answer to that. Neither did I. I spent that weekend in a fog of shock and rage and grief that somehow felt worse than the grief I'd experienced after the funeral. That grief had been clean, if grief could ever be clean. He was dead. I would never see him again. I had to learn to live without him. It was terrible, but it was straightforward. This was a labyrinth of betrayal, each turn revealing new horrors. Tanisha stayed with me, sleeping in the guest room, making sure I ate, keeping me from doing anything rash. Because I wanted to do something rash. I wanted to drive back to that house and kick down the door. I wanted to confront him in front of his other wife, his secret children. I wanted to set his car on fire, burn down his house, make him hurt the way I was hurting. But Tanisha, with her paralegal's logical mind, made me think strategically. If you confront him without a plan, without evidence, without protection, you have no power, she said. He's already proven he's capable of incredible deception. What makes you think he won't find a way to turn this around on you, to make you look crazy, to silence you? Then what do? I asked. First, we gather information. We find out who he really is. We find out what happened 6 months ago. We find out if there even was a death certificate, and if so, whose body was in that casket. We build a case. Then, when we have all the facts, when we hold all the cards, that's when we strike. She was right, though waiting felt like torture. But I'd waited 6 months already. I could wait a little longer if it meant getting real answers, real justice. The first step was the death certificate. Tanisha had connections at the courthouse through her job. On Monday morning, while I called in sick to the school where I taught, claiming a stomach bug, she went downtown. She returned at lunchtime with a folder of documents, her face grave. There's a death certificate, she said, spreading the papers on my dining room table. It's real, or at least it's in the system, issued by the medical examiner's office, signed by a doctor I verified is real, and currently practicing at the hospital where DeShawn supposedly died. I stared at the certificate. There was DeShawn's full name, his date of birth, his social security number, cause of death listed as acute myocardial infarction, the date, time, place of death, the attending physician's signature. It looked completely legitimate. But if he's alive, I said slowly, then this is a fraudulent document. Someone falsified it. Or, Tanisha said carefully, someone else died and the paperwork got mixed up. Or there's an administrative error. Or this is incredibly elaborate identity theft. Or a dozen other explanations that don't involve the conspiracy theories we've been spinning. Tanisha, I saw him. You saw him. That was DeShawn. I saw someone who looked remarkably like DeShawn, she corrected gently. But here's what we need to consider. If that man is DeShawn and he faked his death, we're talking about a crime. Multiple crimes, insurance fraud, falsifying government documents, identity fraud. This isn't just a betrayal, it's a criminal conspiracy. And if he's capable of that, he's potentially dangerous. The word hung in the air. Dangerous. My husband, my partner of 17 years, who had never raised a hand to me, who cried during sentimental commercials, who rescued spiders from the house instead of killing them. Dangerous. But a man who would fake his own death, who would let his wife grieve, who would fraudulently claim life insurance. That man was capable of anything. I need to know more about that woman, I said. The one with the children. Who is she? How long has she been with him? Are those his children? I have a friend who does private investigation work, Tanisha said. I already called her. Her name's Rochelle. She's discreet, professional, and she owes me a favor. I asked her to do a deep background check on the owner of that house. Won't that be expensive? Tanisha gave me a significant look. You have $75,000 in insurance money. I'd say invest in some of it and finding out whether you're entitled to keep that money as money well spent. She had a point. We met Rochelle that evening at a coffee shop downtown. She was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and shrewd, assessing eyes. She listened to my story without visible reaction, taking notes on a small tablet. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. This situation has some troubling elements, she said finally. If what you're describing is accurate, we're looking at a man living under a false identity, or possibly a man who's been living a double life for an extended period. Either scenario suggests significant criminal activity. Before I take this case, I need to know what your ultimate goal is. Are you looking to confront him, report him to authorities, divorce and sue for fraud? What outcome do you want? I realized I didn't know. Revenge, justice, closure, all of the above? I want the truth, I said. Whatever it is, however bad it is, I want to know what really happened. And then I want him to pay for what he's done. Rochelle nodded. I can work with that. Give me a week. I'll start with property records on that house, see who's listed as the owner. Then I'll run background checks, financial records, anything I can access legally. If there's a story here, I'll find it. The next week was the longest of my life, even longer than the week between DeShawn's supposed death and his funeral. I went through the motions at work, teaching my high school students about metaphor and symbolism, discussing themes of betrayal in the literature we were reading. The irony wasn't lost on me. I assigned them an essay on appearance versus reality, and one student, perceptive and thoughtful, wrote about how the people we think we know best can be the most skilled at hiding their true natures. I gave her an A and cried in my car during my lunch break. At home, I couldn't escape DeShawn's presence. His belongings were still everywhere. His clothes still hung in our closet because I hadn't been able to bring myself to donate them. His razor still sat on the bathroom counter. His basketball trophies from high school lined the shelf in our den. Every object a reminder of a shared life that now felt like an elaborate performance, a stage set constructed to hide the truth. I started going through everything with new eyes, looking for clues I'd missed. His financial records, his papers, his personal effects. We'd had separate checking accounts, but a joint savings account. I pulled up the records online, scrolling through months of transactions. Nothing unusual jumped out. Regular deposits from his paycheck, regular withdrawals for bills, the normal financial life of a married couple. But then I noticed something. About a year before his death, DeShawn had opened a separate savings account. I only found it because I was logged into his online banking and clicked on the Accounts tab. There it was, listed below his checking account. A savings account in his name only, with no beneficiary listed. The current balance was zero. But when I pulled up the transaction history, I saw that at its peak, there had been over $40,000 in that account. The deposits had come in irregular intervals, always in cash. Amounts ranging from $500 to $5,000, and then about 3 months before his death, the withdrawals started, large ones, 10,000, 15,000, until the account was empty 2 weeks before he'd supposedly had his heart attack. $40,000 in cash, accumulated and then withdrawn. Where had it come from? Where had it gone? We lived comfortably but not extravagantly on our combined incomes. There was no way DeShawn should have been able to save $40,000 without me noticing money missing from our household budget, unless it wasn't savings, unless it was income from something he hadn't told me about. A second job? Gambling winnings? Something illegal? I took screenshots of everything, sent them to Tanisha with a message asking what she thought. Her reply came within minutes. That looks like someone planning to disappear, building a nest egg, then moving it somewhere untraceable right before vanishing. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was ugly and incomplete. I needed Rochelle's report. I needed to know who that woman was, who those children were, how long this had been going on. The week crawled past. On Friday evening, Rochelle called and asked me to meet her at the same coffee shop. I drove there with Tanisha, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. Whatever I was about to learn, it would change everything. There would be no going back to uncertainty, to the comfortable fiction that maybe I'd been mistaken, that the man at the farmer's market was just a remarkable coincidence. Rochelle was already there, a manila folder on the table in front of her. She looked tired, and something in her expression told me the news wasn't good. Not that any news in this situation could be good, but I could see she'd uncovered something significant. We sat down, and she opened the folder. The house is owned by a woman named Keisha Morrison. She purchased it 8 years ago, has a mortgage through a local credit union. She works as a nurse at the same hospital where your husband supposedly died. Actually, she's 36 years old, never been married according to public records. The 2 children you saw are listed as living at that address, son named Jaden, age 8, and daughter named Aaliyah, age 6. 8 years ago, DeShawn and I had been married for 9 years at that point, had just bought our house. He'd been working at the telecommunications company, coming home every night, sleeping beside me every night, or so I'd thought. How could he have been living another life? I ran financials on both the woman and the property, Rochelle continued. Here's where it gets interesting. The mortgage payments have been consistently made, never late. But they're not coming from Keisha Morrison's bank account. They're coming from a business account, a small LLC registered 8 years ago under the name Summit Communications Consulting. DeShawn worked in telecommunications, I said, my voice hollow. I know, Rochelle said. I checked. Summit Communications Consultant is registered to a man named Darius Blackwell, age 45, no criminal record, no debt, no red flags in the public records. But when I dug deeper, I couldn't find much of anything on Darius Blackwell before 8 years ago. No college records, no previous addresses, no prior employment. It's like he sprang into existence 8 years ago fully formed. A fake identity, Tanisha breathed. That's my assessment, Rochelle confirmed. Someone with the skills and resources to create a convincing identity, establish credit, start a business, maintain a household. This isn't amateur hour. This is someone who knew what they were doing. So DeShawn has been living as Darius Blackwell for 8 years, I said, trying to make sense of it. That means for the past 8 years of our marriage, he was living 2 complete lives. It appears so, Rochelle said. I wasn't able to get photos of Darius Blackwell, but based on the description you gave me and the circumstantial evidence, it seems highly likely they're the same person. What about the death? I asked. Did you find anything about the death certificate? Rochelle's expression darkened. That's where this gets really troubling. I have a contact in the medical examiner's office. I couldn't get official records without a warrant, but I asked some very careful questions. 6 months ago, there was a John Doe brought into the morgue, victim of a hit and run. He was male, black, approximately the right age and build. He'd been dead for several days when he was found, and the condition of the body made visual identification difficult. He had no ID on him, no distinguishing features. My stomach turned over. Oh my God. It's standard procedure to run fingerprints and dental records on unidentified bodies, Rochelle continued. But if someone in the system was cooperating with your husband, if they had access to the right databases, they could have swapped the records, made it look like the John Doe was DeShawn. That would have generated a death certificate. The body would have been released to you for burial, and DeShawn would have been officially dead. But who was in the casket? I whispered. The John Doe, Rochelle said gently. I'm sorry, I know that's a terrible thing to learn, but if my theory is correct, you buried a stranger while your husband walked away. I felt Tanisha's hand close around mine, squeezing tight. The coffee shop around us seemed to recede, the normal sounds of conversation and espresso machines fading into white noise. I'd stood at a grave and mourned a stranger. I'd wept over a closed casket containing someone's son, brother, maybe, father, a person who deserved to be mourned by people who actually knew him. And somewhere, that person's real family might still be looking for him, not knowing he'd been buried under my husband's name. Can you prove any of this? Tanisha asked, her lawyer's mind cutting through to the practical question. Not without official access to records I don't have legal authority to obtain, Rochelle said. But I have enough circumstantial evidence to interest law enforcement. If you want to report this, I can help you put together a package that should trigger an investigation. What are the risks? I asked. If I report this and I'm wrong, what happens? If you're wrong, you look overzealous but not criminal, Rochelle said. The worst outcome is embarrassment. But based on what I've found, I don't think you're wrong. I think your husband faked his death, possibly with inside help from someone at the hospital or medical examiner's office. I think he's been living a double life for 8 years. And I think there's enough evidence here to prove it. I looked at Tanisha. She met my eyes, and I saw my own mixture of rage and determination reflected there. Do it, I said. Report it. I want the police involved. I want a real investigation, and I want him to face consequences. Rochelle nodded. I'll compile everything and reach out to a detective I know in the fraud division. But Simone, you need to prepare yourself. Once this starts, it's going to get ugly. Your life will be under scrutiny. Every financial transaction you've made, every decision you've made since his supposed death. They'll investigate you, too, to make sure you weren't complicit. Are you ready for that? Was I ready? No. But I didn't have a choice. I couldn't live with this knowledge and do nothing. I couldn't let DeShawn or Darius or whoever he really was continue living his double life while I carried the weight of his supposed death. I'm ready, I said. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within days of Rochelle's report, I received a call from Detective Marcus Chen from the Fraud Division. He asked me to come to the station to give a statement. I brought Tanisha with me, and we spent 3 hours in an interview room going over every detail of my marriage, DeShawn's supposed death, and the discovery at the farmer's market. Detective Chen was methodical and thorough, asking questions that made it clear he was taking this seriously. He wanted access to our financial records, our phone records, our emails. He wanted names of everyone DeShawn had been close to, everyone who might have helped him. He wanted to know if I'd noticed anything strange in the months before his death, any unusual behavior or unexplained absences. And there had been. I realized it now, looking back with clarity born of betrayal. DeShawn had taken more business trips in that final year. He'd been on his phone more, texting people he claimed were work contacts. He'd been distant, distracted, emotionally unavailable in ways I'd attributed to work stress. He'd stopped initiating intimacy with me, and when we did make love, he seemed elsewhere, going through the motions. I'd thought we were in a rough patch. Every marriage had them. I'd thought we'd work through it, that we'd come out stronger on the other side. I hadn't realized I was losing him to an entire other life. Did you suspect infidelity? Detective Chen asked. No, I admitted. It never crossed my mind. He was my husband. I trusted him completely. The detective's expression was sympathetic but professional. We're going to need to exhume the body from the grave, he said. We need to verify the identity of the person buried there. If your suspicions are correct, and it's not your husband, that's a crime scene. The thought of them digging up the grave, opening the casket, examining whatever remained made me nauseous. But I nodded. Do whatever you need to do. We'll also be bringing in Darius Blackwell for questioning, he continued, and Keisha Morrison. We need to determine what she knows, whether she's a victim here too or a willing participant. I want to prepare you for the possibility that this is going to become public. Once we make arrests, once court proceedings begin, this story will attract attention. Are you prepared for that? I wasn't, but again, I had no choice. I'll handle it, I said. 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Chen. We picked up Darius Blackwell this morning, brought him in for questioning. I thought you'd want to know. What did he say? I asked, my heart racing. Did he admit it? He asked for a lawyer and stopped talking, the detective said. But his reaction when we said DeShawn's name was telling. He went pale, started sweating. That's not the reaction of someone who's just confused about why he's being questioned. What happens now? We're executing search warrants on both homes, his and yours. We'll be going through everything: financial records, phone records, computers, personal effects. We're also moving forward with the exhumation order, and we've brought Keisha Morrison in for questioning as well. Is she under arrest? Not yet. Right now, she's cooperating. Claims she had no idea Darius was married, no idea about any of this. Says he told her he was a widower when they met 8 years ago, that his wife had died in childbirth along with the baby. Pretty cruel lie if it's true, using a dead wife and child as his cover story. 8 years ago, I'd been very much alive, working at the high school, living with DeShawn in our new house. He'd looked at me across the breakfast table every morning while maintaining an entire fictional backstory for another woman. The enormity of the deception was staggering. This wasn't a mistake, a momentary lapse, a weakness. This was calculated, sustained, comprehensive betrayal spanning nearly a decade. Every day he'd chosen this, chosen to lie to two women, chosen to maintain this elaborate double life. The search of my house was invasive and thorough. Officers went through everything, photographing documents, taking my computer and phone, boxing up papers and personal items. They were polite but systematic, and I felt violated despite knowing it was necessary. Tanisha stayed with me through the whole process, providing moral support and making sure I didn't sign away any rights without understanding exactly what I was agreeing to. They found things I hadn't known existed: a second cell phone hidden in the garage behind some old paint cans, a separate credit card I'd never seen, the bills going to a P.O. box I hadn't known DeShawn had rented, receipts for hotels, restaurants, gifts I'd never received. The accumulated evidence of deception was damning. The exhumation happened on a Tuesday morning. I didn't attend, couldn't bring myself to watch them dig up the grave. But Detective Chen called me that afternoon with the results. The body in the grave is not your husband, he said, without preamble. Dental records confirm it's the John Doe from the hit and run. Someone definitely switched the records in the system. We're now investigating everyone who had access to that information. This is officially a criminal conspiracy. I should have felt vindicated. I'd been right. Everything I'd suspected was true, but instead I just felt empty. The husband I'd loved was never coming back, not because he'd died, but because he'd never really existed. The man I'd married had been a fiction, a role DeShawn had played while simultaneously being Darius somewhere else. What charges is he facing? I asked. Right now, fraud, identity theft, falsifying government documents, insurance fraud. We're also looking at possible accessory to whatever happened to the actual John Doe, depending on whether we can prove he had any involvement in that death. If we can prove someone at the hospital or medical examiner's office helped him, they're looking at their own charges. This is bigger than just your husband faking his death. This is corruption within the system. And the other woman, Keisha? Still maintaining she knew nothing about it. We're investigating her financials and communications, but so far she appears to be another victim. He played her the same way he played you, just with a different story. Another victim. I'd been so focused on my own betrayal that I hadn't fully considered what this meant for her. She'd built a life with this man, had 2 children with him, believed she'd found a partner, and now that was being ripped away too. Her children were about to learn their father was a criminal, a fraud, a man who'd never been who he claimed to be. I couldn't quite summon sympathy for her yet, not when I could still picture her kissing him in that driveway, living the life that should have been mine, or shouldn't have been either of ours. But I recognized intellectually that she was a victim too, caught in the web DeShawn had spun. Trial was set for 4 months later. In the meantime, DeShawn, still legally identified as Darius Blackwell, remained in custody. Bail denied due to flight risk. Keisha Morrison hired a lawyer and cooperated fully with the investigation. turning over every document, every photo, every text message. She filed for full custody of her children and a restraining order preventing any contact with DeShawn. I had to do the same. File legal documents to reclaim my actual marital status, to establish that my marriage had never legally ended because DeShawn had never actually died. It was a legal nightmare, requiring lawyers and court appearances and paperwork that made my head spin. Tanisha helped navigate it all. And when the bills got overwhelming, I reminded myself that I was using DeShawn's fraudulently obtained insurance money to pay for dismantling his fraud. There was a certain poetic justice to that. The media coverage started slowly but built to a frenzy. Man fakes death, lives. Double life for 8 years made for sensational headlines. Reporters camped outside my house, called my phone, showed up at my school. I had to take a leave of absence, unable to handle both the legal proceedings and the public scrutiny while trying to teach teenagers about literature. Some of the coverage was sympathetic to me, portraying me as the betrayed wife who'd uncovered an elaborate fraud. Other coverage was more skeptical, suggesting I must have known something, must have been complicit in some way. Those stories hurt worse than the betrayal itself, the implication that I'd been too stupid or too willfully blind to see what was happening in my own marriage. Tanisha appeared with me on one carefully chosen news program, a respected journalist known for serious investigative work. I told my story calmly, factually, letting the evidence speak for itself. I described the pain of grief, the shock of seeing my supposedly dead husband at a farmer's market, the systematic uncovering of his double life. I didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't beg for sympathy. I just told the truth. The public response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from other people who'd been betrayed by their partners, from people who'd been victims of fraud, from people who simply recognized the pain of having your reality shattered. I couldn't respond to them all, but I read every single one, drawing strength from the knowledge that I wasn't alone in surviving the unsurvivable. The trial itself was a media circus. The courthouse was packed every day, reporters and curious onlookers filling every seat. I sat in the front row behind the prosecution, Tanisha beside me, and watched as the case was laid out in methodical detail. The prosecution presented the evidence systematically: the fake death certificate and the real identity of the body in the grave, the financial record showing the money DeShawn had siphoned away in preparation for his disappearance, the second identity he'd created, the second home, the second family, the hospital administrator who'd been bribed to switch the dental records, who took the stand and testified tearfully about how DeShawn had approached him with a plan and $50,000 in cash. They brought in handwriting experts who confirmed DeShawn had filled out legal documents under both names. They brought in financial analysts who tracked money flowing between accounts. They brought in DeShawn's coworkers from his legitimate job, who testified about the business trips that had grown more frequent, the distraction, the phone calls he'd take in private. They called me to the stand. I wore a navy blue suit, my hair pulled back, minimal makeup. I wanted to look professional, credible, sympathetic without being theatrical. The prosecutor walked me through my marriage the day of DeShawn's supposed death, the funeral, the grief, the discovery at the farmer's market. I kept my voice steady, my answers clear and factual. Then came cross-examination. DeShawn's defense attorney, a sharp woman in an expensive suit, tried to paint me as either complicit or willfully ignorant. Had I noticed nothing unusual? Had I never questioned his absences? Had I never looked at our financial records? I trusted my husband, I said simply. I had no reason to believe he was lying to me about his entire existence. People don't typically go into marriages suspecting their spouse is living a complete double life. But you benefited financially from his supposed death, she pressed. You received $75,000 in life insurance. Money I would return in a heartbeat if it would undo this betrayal, I said. I didn't want money. I wanted my husband, or I wanted the person I thought was my husband. Instead, I got grief and lies, and a revelation that made me question 17 years of my life. I saw several jurors nodding. The defense attorney moved on, unable to shake my credibility. They called Keisha Morrison. She was visibly pregnant now, 6 months along with a third child. She testified through tears about how she met Darius at a hospital fundraiser, how he'd told her he was a widower, how they'd fallen in love, how he'd been a good partner, a good father to their children, how she'd had no idea about his other life, his real name, his real wife. Did you never question why he didn't want a legal marriage? The prosecutor asked. He said he wasn't ready yet, she said, crying. He said the death of his first wife had traumatized him, made him wary of marriage. I thought we had time. I thought eventually he'd heal enough to make it official. I never suspected he was already married to someone else. The defense tried to paint her as a willing participant, someone who'd knowingly entered into a relationship with a married man. But the evidence didn't support it. She'd been deceived as thoroughly as I had, just with different lies. DeShawn himself testified, against his lawyer's advice. I think he couldn't stand being portrayed as a villain, needed to try to explain himself, to make it make sense. He wore a suit that had probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, looked thinner than I remembered, older, the stress of the past months evident in new lines around his eyes. His story was that he'd felt trapped, trapped in a marriage that had grown stale, trapped in a life that felt suffocating, trapped by expectations he couldn't meet. He'd met Keisha and felt alive again, felt like a different person, a better person. So he'd created the space to be that person by becoming someone else entirely. I never meant to hurt anyone, he said, and he sounded sincere, which somehow made it worse. I just wanted to be happy. I wanted a fresh start. The plan was to eventually divorce Simone to make it official, but it never seemed like the right time, and then it had gone on so long that I didn't know how to untangle it without destroying everything. So when the opportunity came with the John Doe, when someone offered me a way out, I took it. I thought it would be cleaner this way. Simone could grieve and move on. Keisha could have the full-time partner she deserved. Everyone would be happier. So you let your wife believe you were dead, the prosecutor said flatly. You let her plan a funeral, bury a stranger, grieve for 6 months while you lived in comfort with your other family. I thought she'd be better off, he insisted. I thought clean break, definitive ending. That would be easier than a messy divorce than her finding out about Keisha and the kids. I was trying to spare her pain. The prosecutor just looked at him. And did it spare her pain, Mr. Blackwell, or whatever your real name is? DeShawn had no answer to that. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Fraud, identity theft, falsifying government documents, insurance fraud, conspiracy. The hospital administrator who'd helped him got his own conviction. DeShawn was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He'd be eligible for parole in 10, but only if he demonstrated genuine remorse and made restitution, including repaying the insurance money he'd fraudulently caused to be paid out. I sat in the courtroom and listened to the judge explain the sentence. 15 years. DeShawn would be 60 when he got out, if he got out early. Our entire marriage had lasted 17 years. He'd spend nearly that long in prison paying for the choice to destroy it. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked at me. Our eyes met for the first time since this whole nightmare began. I thought I'd feel satisfaction, vindication, triumph. Instead, I just felt tired and sad and empty. The man I'd loved didn't exist, had never existed, and mourning the loss of someone who'd never been real was a strange, complicated grief that I didn't have words for. After the trial, life slowly began to return to something resembling normal. I returned to teaching, though I requested a transfer to a different school where the students wouldn't know my story. I sold the Craftsman bungalow, unable to live in a space so haunted by DeShawn's ghost, and bought a smaller condo on the other side of town. I went to therapy, working through the layers of trauma and betrayal. My therapist helped me understand that I'd been emotionally abused, that the systematic deception qualified as psychological abuse, that I wasn't stupid or blind or complicit, that I'd been victimized by someone skilled at manipulation. It helped, slowly. Keisha reached out to me 6 months after the trial. We met for coffee, two women bonded by having loved the same liar. Her third child had been born by then, a daughter she'd named Grace. She showed me pictures of all three kids. The boy looked remarkably like DeShawn, same smile, same eyes. It hurt to see it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know that doesn't change anything. Doesn't undo any of it. But I need you to know I had no idea. I would never knowingly have gotten involved with a married man." "I believe you," I said, and I did. We were both victims of the same con, just different versions of it. We didn't become friends exactly, but we maintained contact. There was something comforting about having someone else who understood the specific nature of this betrayal, someone else who'd loved the fiction DeShawn had created. The life insurance money was seized as proceeds of fraud, returned to the insurance company. They sued DeShawn's estate, such as it was, though there was little left to recover. I was okay with that. I'd never wanted money that came from lies. I started over financially, living on my teaching salary, rebuilding savings slowly. It was harder than when DeShawn and I had two incomes, but it was honest. Every dollar I earned was mine, not tainted by deception. 2 years after the trial, I was at a different farmer's market on a different Saturday morning, buying peaches from a different vendor. I'd moved on from the old market, couldn't go back there without seeing DeShawn's ghost buying tomatoes. This market was smaller, more local, less crowded. I was examining apples when someone said my name. I turned to find a man about my age, tall, kind eyes, graying at the temples. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't mean to bother you. I just wanted to say I followed your story in the news. What you went through, what you survived. It was remarkable. I admired your strength." I didn't feel particularly strong, but I thanked him. His name was Malcolm. He was a teacher, too, history at a middle school across town. Divorced, two teenage daughters. He asked if I'd like to get coffee sometime, just as friends, no pressure. I hesitated. The idea of trusting anyone again, of being vulnerable, of opening myself to potential betrayal, terrified me. But my therapist's words echoed in my mind. "Not everyone is DeShawn. Not every relationship is a lie. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to try again." "Coffee sounds nice," I told Malcolm. We had coffee, then we had dinner. Then we started spending weekends together, cautiously building something that felt fragile and precious and real. He was patient with my trust issues, my need to move slowly, my occasional panic when he was late or didn't text back immediately. He understood that loving someone who'd been betrayed the way I'd been meant, accepting that the scars would always be there. 3 years after the trial, DeShawn sent me a letter from prison. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. He'd written pages, trying to explain, trying to apologize, trying to make me understand why he'd done what he'd done. Most of it was self-serving, excuses and justifications. But buried in, there were a few sentences that sounded genuine. I destroyed everything good because I was afraid and selfish and didn't know how to be honest. I convinced myself I was protecting you by lying, but I was only protecting myself. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it, but I'm sorry anyway. I read the letter once, then put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say between us. He was my past, a painful chapter that had taught me hard lessons about trust and truth and the importance of facing difficult things instead of running from them. Malcolm and I got engaged 4 years after we met. It was a small proposal, just the two of us on a beach at sunset, nothing elaborate. He didn't hide the ring in food or hire a flash mob or create a spectacle. He just asked if I'd marry him, and I said yes. The wedding was small, immediate family only, at a courthouse with a judge officiating. I wore a simple dress, not white, because I wasn't pretending this was my first marriage, or that I came to this without history. Malcolm wore a suit and cried when I said my vows. We promised to be honest with each other, to face problems together, to never let deception poison what we were building. Tanisha was my maid of honor. Rochelle came to the wedding too, the private investigator who'd helped uncover the truth. In a way, she'd saved my life, or at least saved me from living a lie indefinitely. At the small reception after, Tanisha raised a glass to toast. "To Simone," she said, "who survived the unsurvivable and came out the other side stronger, who refused to let betrayal make her bitter." who had the courage to trust again, and to Malcolm, who had the wisdom to recognize what a rare and precious person he'd found. I cried happy tears this time, surrounded by people who loved me honestly, who saw me clearly, who didn't have secret lives hiding in shadows. That night, lying next to Malcolm in our shared apartment, our shared honest life, I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years earlier, the one who'd seen a ghost buying tomatoes and whose world had shattered. That woman had been broken by betrayal, had doubted everything she knew, had questioned her own judgment and perception. But that woman had also been brave. She'd followed her instincts. She'd pursued the truth even when the truth was terrible. She'd survived revelation after revelation and hadn't let it destroy her. She'd built a new life from the rubble of the old one. I wasn't grateful for what DeShawn had done. The betrayal had left permanent scars, trust issues I'd probably carry forever, a wariness that would never fully disappear. But I was grateful for what I'd learned about my own strength, my own resilience, my own capacity to rebuild. The story people knew was dramatic, the kind of thing that made headlines and got turned into television movies. Man fakes death, lives double life, gets caught, goes to prison. It had a beginning, middle, and end, a clear narrative arc. But my story, the real story, was more complicated. It was about learning that the people we trust most can be strangers, about the strength required to face unbearable truths, about the courage needed to try again after being devastated, about the slow, painful work of healing from betrayal and building something new. Sometimes I still saw DeShawn in my dreams, not as the convicted criminal in prison, but as the man I'd thought he was. The husband who'd brought me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, who'd danced with me in our kitchen, who'd held me through my father's death and promised we'd face everything together. Those memories were precious and poisonous simultaneously, beautiful moments that had never been real. I'd learned to hold contradictions, to acknowledge that I'd loved him while accepting he'd never existed, to recognize that the pain had been genuine even if the relationship was a lie, to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting or forgiving, but about accepting what was true and choosing to move forward anyway. 5 years after that Saturday, morning at the farmer's market, I was happy. Genuinely, honestly happy. Not the naive happiness I'd known before when I'd believed the world was simple and people were who they seemed, but a harder-won happiness earned through survival and struggle and the choice to remain open despite every reason to close myself off. I taught my students about betrayal in literature, about the way Shakespeare and Morrison and Hurston wrote about trust and deception. And sometimes, when I thought they were mature enough to handle it, I told them about my own experience, not for sympathy, but as a lesson about resilience, about the importance of evidence and truth, about the strength required to rebuild a shattered life. They listened, these teenagers who thought they were invincible, who couldn't imagine surviving such a betrayal. And I told them what I wish someone had told me at 17. You're stronger than you know. You can survive things you think will destroy you. And on the other side of the worst pain imaginable, there's still life waiting, still joy, still love, still hope. I believed it because I'd lived it. I'd followed my dead husband home from a farmer's market and uncovered a conspiracy of lies. I'd watched my entire reality disintegrate. I'd rebuilt from nothing, brick by brick, truth by truth, and I'd found my way to something real, something honest, something worth having. That was the story I wanted to tell, not about the betrayal, though that was part of it, but about the survival, about the woman who saw a ghost and refused to pretend she hadn't, about the courage required to pursue the truth even when you suspect it will destroy you, about the possibility of rebuilding after devastation, because in the end, that was what mattered. Not that DeShawn had lied, though he had. Not that he'd been caught, though he was. But that I'd survived. That I'd found the strength to face the truth, to seek justice, to rebuild my life into something authentic and real. On our first anniversary, Malcolm and I went back to that beach where he'd proposed. We walked along the water at sunset, talking about the year we'd had, the life we were building together. It was simple and ordinary and honest, and it was everything I'd thought I'd lost forever. Do you ever regret it? Malcolm asked. Following him that day, sometimes I wonder if you'd have been happier not knowing. I thought about it, really considered it. Would ignorance have been better? Could I have moved on from my grief, built a new life as a widow, never knowing that DeShawn was alive and living with another family? No, I said finally. The truth is always better than comfortable lies. Always. Even when it destroys everything you thought you knew. Because at least then you can rebuild on solid ground instead of quicksand. He squeezed my hand, and we walked on as the sun set over the water, casting everything in shades of gold and red. Behind us were the ashes of my old life, the betrayal and the pain and the slow reconstruction. Ahead was uncertainty, but it was honest uncertainty, built on truth and trust, and the hard-won knowledge that I could survive anything. I'd seen my dead husband buying tomatoes at a farmer's market, and I'd followed him home. That decision had cost me everything I thought I had, but it had also given me back something infinitely more valuable, my reality, my truth, myself. And in the end, that was worth any price. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. On the screen, you can see 2 new stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next story. With love and respect.